The dust settles differently in old places. It moves without urgency, drifting in slow spirals through stale air, as if time itself has chosen not to participate. The forgotten room in rural Texas, sealed in 1989 and left untouched for decades, carries that same stillness, a kind of quiet that presses against the ribs. The investigator steps through the threshold with careful restraint, aware that every shift of the floorboards could disturb something delicate. This is not just a return. It is a re-entry into a stalled moment, a place where memory clings to corners, faint yet persistent, waiting for someone to acknowledge it. The first 100 words sit inside the charged atmosphere of a suspended past, a dim, narrow duplex swallowed by heat, the smell of old paper dissolving into the wooden walls, and the soft echo of the investigator's breath. Nothing here has moved since the night it all stopped. The air feels weighted, as though the silence has a physical shape, and inside this shape, the truth waits. He stands still. No sound, no rush, just the slow, steady pulse of someone returning to a place he once studied, walked through, misread. The dim light outlines each object as though presenting a question. A pair of shoes by the wall, a coffee mug coated in a thin powder of time, a narrow dresser with peeling paint, and beyond it, the small, pale square traced into the dust where a photograph must have once rested before being collected as evidence. The investigator, David Hale, exhales softly. Even that feels loud. He treats the room as one would treat a fragile memory. One step, pause, another step. His gloved hand skims the air above the dresser without touching it. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The room has already said enough. In the middle of it all stands the quiet reminder of why he is here again. The unsolved disappearance of Marena Vos, aged 23 at the time she was found. A name once whispered in the halls of the department, a case once believed solvable before it slid into the archive, preserved, but without breath. Marena Vos, college archivist, known for carrying notebooks wherever she went. Quiet, reserved, careful with details, the kind of person who arranged her days in subtle, structured edges. Texas-born, raised near the plains, lived alone by choice but surrounded by colleagues who respected her calm precision. Nothing dramatic in her life. No disorder. No unexpected patterns. The file says she was last seen leaving her workplace early on a warm September evening. She walked home, entered her duplex, and, according to the timeline, never stepped out again. A neighbor reported a light left on too long. The department arrived, documented everything. A full report, a full effort. Yet no clear answer. David remembers those early days, the thick binders, the quiet sighs from detectives who hoped each page might reveal something missed. He remembers his own early certainty, later replaced with a steady, growing understanding. The case had slipped away. Every piece seemed to match something, but not quite. The logic existed, but never sharpened into clarity. He had been younger then, less patient, more certain of his instincts. Now, decades later, he returns with new evidence that demands old rooms be revisited. He kneels near the foot of the narrow bed. Dust shifts beneath his weight. The sheets, long removed by the original team, once carried faint impressions of something unexplained. He scans the floor, the wall, the corner where past notes indicate a small framed photo once sat. That photo, recovered and sealed in 1989, was recently retested. The image itself shows Marena standing in her office, smiling in a reserved, almost reluctant way, as though unsure the moment deserved to be captured. What matters now, though, is not the image. It's the barely visible contact traced behind the frame. A faint biological clue once thought too small to analyze with the technology of that time. A clue stored, marked, and nearly forgotten. But DNA advances do not forget. A few weeks ago, the lab called. Something matched. Not perfectly, not loudly, but enough to reopen a silent room. That is why David is back, to study everything with the precision he wishes he had decades earlier. He moves along the edges of the room. Each object reminds him of time's strange persistence. The smell, old dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic rises with each step. The temperature inside feels slightly cooler than the hall outside. The ceiling fan, still coated in a fine rust, droops like a tired guardian. He thinks, "You should have looked longer. You should have asked one more question. You should have seen the pattern." But the mind is not a flawless recorder. It forgets, shifts, reconstructs. Evidence doesn't, evidence waits. He unfolds the case file with slow care. The paper edges crackle. The binding creaks. Inside, the first page shows Marena's profile: age, height, background, occupation. A document that once felt complete. Now it reads like a placeholder, a summary of someone whose story deserved more detail. He breathes in and steadies his mind. This time, he intends to see everything. He turns to the witness section. A single statement catches the corner of his eye, something he overlooked the first time. Not a dramatic revelation, not a contradiction, just a small note from a coworker, handwritten in the margins. She mentioned someone was asking about her records lately, sounded annoyed, not frightened. Back then the comment felt insignificant. Annoyance doesn't imply threat, it implies inconvenience. Investigators had bigger questions to follow. Now, with the new DNA trace, the comment shifts slightly. Annoyance can suggest familiarity, a person known well enough to become a minor irritation, a coworker perhaps, a visitor, someone within her orbit. David underlines the sentence gently. Small details matter most when time forces them to stand alone. He turns from the file and lets his senses guide him. The room feels stale, but not empty. The faint scent of paper lingers, preserved in the dry Texas air. The walls hold a subtle imprint of sun wear, where the light through the small window once washed repeatedly over the same patch. The floorboards near the door have slight scuff marks, documented but never explained. He listens, nothing. The silence holds everything. He traces the path Marena might have taken. Door, keys placed on the small hook, bag set on the chair, steps toward the dresser. A pause, a breath, a moment of reflection perhaps, or something else, something unrecorded. He studies the dresser again. The dust outlines the absence of the photograph frame. A faint ring of discoloration marks where the wood once held weight. Something subtle, something easy to miss. He steps closer. There on the underside of the dresser's top lip, something almost invisible. A narrow scrape, thin, rough, as though someone had quickly brushed an object against it. The 1989 report listed minor surface disturbances but never tied them to any action. At the time, they held no meaning. But now, with fresh perspective, the scrape suggests a simple possibility. The photograph frame was moved abruptly, not carefully. Someone may have grabbed it in haste. Someone who knew the room. Someone who knew Marena. Someone who reached for the frame as though searching for something behind it. Not coincidence, not randomness, logic. David traces it lightly with his gloved fingertip. Then he freezes. On the inner edge of the wood sits a tiny, barely there fiber untouched for decades. Not a dramatic clue, not a decisive answer, but a small, quiet thing capable of holding history. He leans closer. The fiber's color is unusual for the room, a pale thread slightly curled. Not from Marena's documented clothing. Not from the bedding. Something introduced. Something left behind. something that should not be here. He photographs it, catalogs it, marks the coordinates. His pulse steadies, not with excitement but with precision, the steady rhythm of someone who understands that small details carry the greatest weight. The scrape, the fiber, the hasty motion, a pattern forms. David sits on the edge of the empty bed frame. The air feels heavier now, as though the room is finally breathing again. For decades, the case remained suspended, waiting, silent, patient. He looks around, the walls, the dust, the faint outline of a life paused. He thinks of Marena, not the file, not the data points, but the person, her notebooks, her quiet presence, her precise work. He wonders if she sensed something shifting in her final days, if she noticed the scrape, if she reached for the frame as well. He wonders what it means that justice moves slowly, mechanically, without emotion, and yet something human still lingers here, something that resists closure, something that insists on being seen. He closes the file gently. There is more to uncover, and the room, for the first time in decades, seems ready to speak. The room is quiet again, but not with the same stillness it held moments earlier. Something has shifted, the scrape beneath the dresser, the pale fiber, the faint logic forming its first outline. It is not revelation. It is not breakthrough. It is only the slow, deliberate tilt of perspective, the kind that comes not from luck but from returning to a place with different eyes. David stands, the file open in his left hand, the room unfolding in his right. The air settles around him in thin layers, each carrying its own fragment of memory. He draws in a long breath and lets it slip out with steady restraint. There is no rush. Insight comes quietly here. It always has. He moves back through the doorway and enters the adjoining room, a narrow living area where the first investigation conducted its initial sweep decades earlier. The furniture has long been removed, catalogued, stored, or discarded. Only the marks remain. Faint discolorations on the carpet outline the places where tables once stood. A thin indentation near the window marks where a chair used to rest. He opens the second binder of the original case. The pages crackle with age. A low hum from the ceiling registers his presence, though the fan remains motionless. This was where early assumptions took root. The timeline, the statements, the environmental details collected with good intention but limited tools. Now, with the newly discovered fiber at the crime scene, each old page feels like something waiting to be reread. He scans the early inventories again. He reads slowly this time, a deliberate pace. Every observation must earn its place. Then he stops. A small detail in the list of removed items catches his eye. One leather-bound personal notebook, blank pages, no written entries. He frowns slightly. Marena was known for documenting everything. People described her as methodical, someone who wrote down details even when there was nothing important to record. A blank notebook feels contradictory. He flips through the photographs taken at the time. One image shows the notebook on a small table near the couch. Another image, taken later that same night, shows the table without the notebook. The item had already been collected, processed, and marked trivial. He pauses again. Why would someone known for writing constantly possess a blank notebook? He writes a note in the margin. Possibility, item switched, removed before, purpose unknown. It is not a conclusion. It is a question that loops back on itself. He continues through the living area with slow, cautious steps. The carpet is thin, brittle in places. He moves around an area that was once marked for a small stain, long removed, but still present in the documented grid. He kneels. He listens. Nothing. Then something faint. Not a sound exactly, more like the slight shift of air near the window. He turns his head. The old frame rattles very softly, almost imperceptibly, as though disturbed by his presence. He approaches. On the inside of the sill, barely noticeable under a thin film of dust, lies a shallow groove, straight, deliberate, aligned with the wood. He brushes a gloved finger near it without touching. The shape is not natural, not weathering. It is the kind of mark made when someone places an object against the sill repeatedly, perhaps pressing it into the surface with distracted force. He checks the case photos again. The groove is not visible in the earliest images, meaning it was either missed or created after the initial documentation. He steps back. The groove, the blank notebook, the scrape beneath the dresser, the fiber. Individually, they are small. Collectively, they begin to generate a shape, not a complete one, but a structure with its own quiet logic. He returns to the hallway and opens the file that contains peripheral interviews, names that surfaced not as suspects, but as routine reference points. He turns to a short transcript from a coworker. She liked quiet places, said her apartment was the only spot where her thoughts stayed organized. He underlines it. Then he flips to another. If she was irritated with someone, she wouldn't say it openly. She'd just write it down to cool off. He circles it. And then a final one. She mentioned someone stopped by her office a few times asking about her archiving work. She didn't sound worried, just tired. He sets the file down slowly. Pattern recognized. Marena organized her world meticulously. She wrote everything. She kept structured quiet. If she was bothered by someone persistent, she wouldn't confront. She would record. Which returns him to the blank notebook. Or rather, the impossibility of its blankness. Someone may have taken her written notes, or replaced the notebook with an unused one. That would require familiarity. Not random intrusion. Not coincidence. A person who knew about her writing habit. A person who knew exactly what to remove. He steps back into the bedroom and retrieves the original crime scene image showing the dresser with the framed photo. He studies Marena's expression again. A subtle smile. Reserved. Almost forced. Behind her in the office backdrop, several shelves filled with archival boxes and binders stand neatly aligned. He zooms in mentally, focusing not on her, but on the objects in the background. A small metal shelf, a row of labeled folders, a stack of notebooks arranged by size. He remembers something. A detail from a colleague's statement. She had one notebook she would never leave at work, the one she kept at home. The missing notebook from the apartment. Not replaced, removed. If the notebook contained her final observations, including the interactions with the person who asked about her records, then the motive becomes clearer. Not emotion, not chance. Protection. Someone removed a notebook because they feared what she had written. He notes it carefully. He returns to the dresser and crouches again. The pale fiber sits where he photographed it earlier. He examines it under the small flashlight clipped to his jacket. The thread is thin, synthetic, slightly frayed on one end. The color is off-white, but with a faint tint that suggests it came from a specific type of fabric. He remembers the lab report. The DNA trace on the photo frame was partial, modern technology enabling its detection. The match pointed toward an individual who passed through the archives in 1989, someone who handled collections, visited academic records, and left the town shortly after. The fiber may connect. a small, quiet link between the dresser and the archival room where Marena worked. He marks its location on the diagram. Each piece may build toward the twist, a twist not born from surprise, but from methodical alignment. David sits again, this time at the window ledge. The groove beneath his hand is narrow, deliberate. He imagines a person pressing something small against this spot, perhaps while looking outside, checking if anyone noticed them, perhaps while waiting for darkness, perhaps while gathering nerve. He replays the early investigative notes. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. No items of value missing. Only the notebook unaccounted for. Frame slightly misaligned. Carpet indentation near the window. He writes the possibilities. 1. Marena knew the visitor. 2. She allowed them in. 3. The person searched for something. 4. The search involved the photo frame. 5. The person removed the notebook. 6. They lingered by the window, nervous, checking outside. 7. They left quietly. Not dramatic, not extraordinary. Just human. Someone familiar who made a deliberate choice. 15. Returning to the evidence box. He opens the old sealed evidence box 12B. Inside rests the frame that once held Marena's photograph. He lifts it gently. The weight is lighter than expected. He studies the metal back, the clasp used to secure the picture. There, on the inside edge, tiny abrasion marks a line with the scrape beneath the dresser. The object was handled roughly. Someone may have pried it open without fully understanding the mechanism, creating tension that caused the scrape. He traces the marks with slow precision. A person searching, not calmly but urgently. He reassembles the timeline. The person enters, heads to the dresser, grabs the frame, opens it, removes the photo or checks behind it, leaves trace DNA, moves quickly, leaves the fiber, removes the notebook, pauses at the window, exits. The notebook may have contained something specific, a name or note or clue that felt threatening. This is no longer a case of what happened. It is a case of why. 16. The old tape recording. In the second binder, tucked into a plastic sleeve, is a tape transcript, a short recording from an officer who visited her workplace after Marena's death. The officer's note reads, "Found an empty space on her shelf. Coworkers say she usually kept her home notebook there during busy weeks, but it wasn't present. They assumed she took it home." He exhales. This aligns too neatly with the apartment's missing notebook. The notebook existed in two worlds, one at home, one at work, but only the home version went missing. And that missing piece is enough to shift the case toward motive. 17. The mechanical shape of justice. He stands slowly and gathers the files. His movements are controlled, deliberate, part of the practiced restraint of someone who has spent years learning to quiet his own presence in service of the evidence. He looks again at the dresser, at the window, at the silent angles of the room. He thinks, this isn't about finding something new. It's about understanding what was always here. Justice in cold cases is slow, procedural, almost emotionless. It functions without warmth. It is a mechanism, not a sentiment. Yet something human persists, not loud, not expressive, but quiet, like the trace of someone's handwriting long after the ink has dried. 18. The unresolved weight. As David prepares to leave the room for the night, he pauses with his hand on the light switch. Darkness pools in the corners, waiting. The air thickens again. He glances toward the empty space on the dresser where the photo once stood. He whispers, not fully intentionally, "Marena, you wrote it down, didn't you?" Only dust answers. He turns off the light. In the dimness, the small clues remain: the scrape, the fiber, the groove, the missing notebook, quiet fragments of logic waiting to form the full, devastating truth. He steps out and closes the door gently. The room returns to silence, but it is no longer the same silence as before. It has shifted, changed, awakened. The case is beginning to breathe again. The next morning arrives without ceremony. Dawn spreads across the Texas horizon in a thin, muted wash, barely coloring the field behind the old duplex. David Hale stands outside the structure once more, the cool air brushing against his jacket. Overnight, nothing has changed, but investigation rarely needs change. It needs alignment. It needs the quiet repetition of details until a pattern emerges with steady inevitability. He unlocks the door and steps inside. The temperature difference is immediate. Interior air, stagnant and layered with years of dust, settles around him like a slow exhale from a long silent room. He rests his case files on the table near the entry, flips open the binder and begins. The final 1,500 words start where the logic sharpened last night. A missing notebook. A disturbed photograph frame. A faint groove on the window ledge. A synthetic fiber out of place. A partial DNA trace recently matched. Individually, they feel small. Collectively, they feel inevitable. 19. The profile hidden in plain sight. With the matched DNA result, the department had already given him access to extended personnel lists from the 1980s Archives Division, past interns, visiting researchers, consultants, part-time assistants. Most names meant nothing to the case at the time. The list had been reviewed, filed, and eventually forgotten. The matched DNA belonged to a person who once handled records during a short-term assignment. A person who left the state abruptly after the incident. A person who had both motive and proximity, but whose involvement had never risen above background noise. A name surfaces now with slow clarity. Evan Mallory, 28 years old in 1989, visiting researcher, worked with archival materials for a temporary project involving regional land records, came into contact with Marena's department several times, known to be meticulous, quiet, private, the type of person whose presence never registered as intrusive. David reads the old employment form. In the margins, someone from HR wrote a brief note. Polite, keeps to himself, requests access to more files than usual for someone in his position. He turns the page. Another note from a coworker. Asked questions about system access levels. Didn't seem harmful, just persistent. Persistence. A small but consistent detail. The kind of persistence that might irritate someone like Marena. Not enough to alarm her, but enough to warrant a private note in her notebook. A notebook that later vanished. 20. Reconstructing the sequence. In cold cases, progress often comes not from new evidence, but from reorganizing old evidence into a coherent timeline. David writes the following sequence across a blank sheet. 1. Evan asks repeated questions about archival records. 2. Marena notes these interactions in her notebook. 3. Evan learns of the notes or fears being recorded. 4. A visit occurs at her home. Voluntary entry, no forced door. 5. Evan searches for the notebook. 6. He removes it. 7. He checks the photo frame, perhaps looking for a hidden note or key. 8. He leaves DNA behind. 9. He pauses at the window, nervous, listening, waiting. 10. He exits. None of this requires coincidence. All of it follows logic. And so does the next step. 21. The twist emerging from fabric and paper. He reopens the evidence box and examines the synthetic fiber again. It is narrow, pale, slightly curled. He studies the lab's preliminary report. The fiber comes from a fabric blend used in a specific type of archival glove standard in the late 1980s. Old gloves. Issued only to those handling sensitive documents, not civilian clothing, not household textiles. Workplace gear. This ties the stranger in the apartment not to a random intruder, but to someone familiar with the archive environment, someone who used these gloves frequently. Someone like Evan Mallory. But the twist is not the match. The twist lies in something quieter, subtler. The gloves were replaced by the department only 2 months after the incident, following a policy update. The old gloves were discarded. None should have remained in circulation. Which means the fiber found in Marena's apartment didn't come from a glove she handled. It came from a glove someone brought from work. Someone who reused old materials. Someone who kept an outdated pair after disposal. Someone precise enough to keep tools long past their replacement date. Someone who handled archives with unusual thoroughness, enough to want older gloves with softer fabric. This small detail reorients the case, not a random visitor, not a desperate moment, a deliberate act planned using workplace tools. A small, devastating twist. Not dramatic, but logical. 22. The room reveals its final shape. He returns to the window and studies the groove again. The width matches the edge of a small, slim object, something that could be pressed against the sill repeatedly, leaving behind a straight indentation. He tests the hypothesis using an evidence marker, aligning it without applying pressure. The width fits. He checks the old inventory list again. The missing item is not only the notebook. A narrow brass letter opener, previously kept on her desk, was never logged in the original evidence list. It appears in an early photo but not in the later documentation. He flips back through the binder. The letter opener appears once, faintly visible on the edge of her desk in a scene photograph. The next photo, taken minutes later, shows the desk empty. Not catalogued. Not collected. Not seen again. If Evan removed the notebook, he may have taken the letter opener as well. It could have been used to open the frame. It could have been pressed nervously against the window sill. The groove fits the edge shape. The absence fits the timeline. Everything aligns. 23. The call that closes the loop. David steps outside and leans against the side of the duplex, phone pressed to his ear. "Run the employment records again," he says quietly. "I need movement history on Mallory, last known address, any processing errors from '89, anything showing he checked out earlier than reported." A pause on the other end. Then a voice replies, fragmented, hesitant. He filed a departure slip 2 days before Marena's death. That slip was never cross-verified. It looks rushed. David closes his eyes, not in triumph, not in emotion, in understanding. The notebook mattered, enough to rush a departure, enough to leave the state, enough to hope the case would remain buried beneath dust. Silence stretches between him and the air around him. He whispers, almost to himself, "Logic, not luck." 24. The notebook's ghost. He re-enters the apartment one last time and stands in the bedroom doorway. The outline where the frame once rested is still visible. The missing notebook, its weight, its pages, its quiet record of human interaction, feels more present now than the objects that remain. He imagines the scene as it must have been. Marena sits at her desk. She writes quietly. The pen moves with precision. Then she hears a knock, someone she knows, someone she has seen around her workplace. Not a threat, not a stranger, just someone persistent. She opens the door. The rest unfolds not with drama, but with the slow erosion of trust. The notebook is taken. The frame is disturbed. A person stands at the window, unsure whether they've bought enough time. Every detail here reflects intention, not impulse. 25. The final alignment. He sets the binders aside and stares at the space for a long moment. He sees the scrape beneath the dresser differently now. It isn't just a careless movement. It is a clue about urgency, about someone who didn't fully understand how to handle the frame, someone accustomed to documents, not personal belongings. He sees the fiber differently. Not contamination, evidence. He sees the missing notebook differently. Not misplaced, removed. He sees the groove differently. Not wear habit. He sees the departure slip differently. Not coincidence, preparation. Everything circles back to the same person. Everything anchors around the same possibility. This is how cold cases break, not from grand confession, but from small, quiet truths that accumulate until the only reasonable answer is the one that has been waiting all along. 26. The mechanical end. The final report will follow procedure. DNA trace confirmed. Fiber identified with workplace gloves. Missing notebook indicates motive. Departure slip suggests evasion. Timeline aligns with known interactions. Letter opener absence matched to window groove. The case can be forwarded. The logic, clean and mechanical, is ready. David knows this part well. Once the evidence aligns, the administrative process moves with steady, impersonal certainty, a motion that feels both necessary and hollow. Justice, as always, is methodical, detached, a machinery of conclusions. 27. The human remainder. Before leaving the apartment for the final time, David turns and looks back into the silent bedroom. The dust swirls faintly with the shift of air from the open door. He imagines Marena's presence again, not the details of the case, but the quiet person captured in the archival photograph. He wonders what she hoped people might understand about her one day. He wonders what may have filled the missing notebook. He wonders if she ever suspected the person who stood in this room. He sits on the bed frame and lets the weight of the room settle over him. Something inside him softens, not outwardly. The tone remains restrained, the discipline intact, but in a way that acknowledges the humanity in the work. The truth may be mechanical, the process may be cold, but loss is not. He closes his eyes for a long moment. When he opens them again, the room feels different, not resolved, not healed but seen. 28. The unresolved reflection. He steps into the hallway, files gathered in his hand, and pauses at the threshold. The Texas light outside is brighter now, but the interior remains dim, suspended between past and present. He whispers one final thought into the stillness. Some answers don't fix anything, they just finish the page. He walks out. The door closes. The case is solved, but something human lingers, a faint, unresolved weight that remains in the spaces evidence cannot measure. The mechanical motion of justice continues, but the quiet echo of what was lost endures. And somewhere in the unrecorded silence of a missing notebook, Marena's final words remain unseen, but no longer unheard.